Hello there, thank you for joining me again today. On the bench for repair today is a Conn Selmer saxophone, one of my saxophones in the collection that I have. I have quite a few musical instruments here, we've got a bit of a collection of everything really. Anyway, you can never have enough saxes, so we've even got another one here, which is a gold plated version, or a gold effect should I say. If it's gold plated I'd have sold it by now, but anyway, it's got a gold effect on it, and that's brass. This one's quite a budget saxophone made by a company called Artemis, I think, and it's got a few little marks and dings in it and what have you. And the other one on the bench is a Conn Selmer saxophone, which is an older one, and they're more geared up towards the student professional musician kind of brand really. But this one has got a fault on it, which we're going to go into. Despite what many people think as well about the saxophone, it's not actually a brass instrument. A lot of people make that assumption that it's made of brass, which it is, you know, obviously. And everybody thinks it's part of the brass musical family, instrument family. It isn't, it's actually part of the woodwind family as well. So this is what some people get confused about with the saxophones. But anyway, we'll get right into it. We'll have a look at the saxophone and what the repair is. They are actually quite intricate instruments. Got lots of keys, buttons and rods and connecting rods and links and screws that set certain things, and pads and adjusters and all sorts of things all over them for the control of the instrument. And pearl effect keys, lots of keys across including palm keys obviously, and the buzz key, and we've got other keys down here as well, and another one there, some more there, and then these three here, and then there's even one on the back as well, the thumb for the octave. So there's quite a lot of keys on a saxophone. You know, obviously quite a complex instrument, but there's lots and lots of these links and things like that as well, which we'll need to look at as part of this repair video. So join me on today's expedition. Obviously it's a bit of a surprise on this channel, because normally we look at radio frequency test equipment and radio communications equipment, doing measurements and microwave radio, RF related discipline. But there are some similarities between this instrument and some other RF applications as well, which I'll explain as we go through this video. So bear with me, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the video, and in the end we'll play the instrument and see what it sounds like. So back with you shortly. It just goes to prove you've got to be a cool cat to play jazz. So we've got the funky cat and the saxophone. And yeah, you've got to be a cool cat, man, play jazz. Okay, so before we get into the fault on this particular saxophone, I think one of the nicest things about this instrument is the way that it appears. It's a very complex instrument regards to how it's manufactured and set up, with all the links and buttons and certain notes. When you press the buttons down, are linked to other pads and things, because obviously it operates with pads opening and closing on the tube, the main cavity, which is this entire body, right the way from the neck, where we've got the mouthpiece and the reed, which I'll go into in a moment, right the way down. And you'll notice it gets fatter as it gets to the bottom before it curves round, and then obviously gets to the bell. And again, it's all about cavities and closing off holes, which then allow the instrument note to change. So it's a very intricate instrument when you look at some of the links and the way that it's designed. You know, obviously it's a very interesting instrument. I think that's one of the things that got me into the saxophone in the first place, is that it's such a beautiful looking instrument, and it's really advanced really for its age. I mean, don't forget, this instrument was invented in the early 1840s by Adolf Sax, And back then manufacturing isn't like it is today. So in order to perfect an instrument such as this that early on is quite an achievement, I think. But it's so well designed, you know, it's obviously a very, very intricate design. And I just find it so interesting of an instrument and its unique sound, and the way that it's sound that you can play in different styles, articulate the notes differently, you know, you can practice to your heart's content on it, and never get tired. And I've never really got tired of the saxophone. Other instruments I've played for a while, and you know, after a bit, if you don't do much progression, improvisation and advancing in improvisation, you sometimes get a little bit worn out with it, and you know, you might put the instrument down for a long time and not pick it up. But I can't say that's been the case with the saxophone. It's always an interesting instrument to play around with. You can have a lot of fun with the saxophone, and you can really make any kind of music with it that you want. I mean, obviously it can be used in classical setting, jazz, blues, rock, dance music. You know, there's obviously a lot of dance music that uses saxophone with it as well, club music, things like that. And every now and then it sort of revives itself, you know, in mainstream music. It's still there even today. And it's a fantastic instrument really to have in the studio. But as far as the complicacies of it are concerned, as you can see looking at the number of links and pads and rods, you know, there's rods going all over the instrument, front, side, back. We've obviously got pads on the rear as well, which open and close when you play certain notes. More keys. There's keys everywhere on the saxophone, so we'll have a look at that more in depth. But of course, one of the things that we do have on this instrument is a slight adjustment to make, which I'll explain, and we'll look at that in a moment. But when you just look at it, its grandeur and the way that it's been designed and manufactured, and all the parts and the thought that's gone into, you know, creating these beautiful pearl keys, and all the little wheels, and you know, fantastic detail, you know, so your finger can roll across from one pad to another, you know, and it's just like you just go across, or from one to the other, and it just makes it so easy to use, you know. And the nice pearl indent keys as well, and these dual light buttons, you know, it's really, really good looking instrument, it really is. And I'm not just saying that because obviously I like playing the saxophone, but I remember when I first saw the saxophone, I just thought, I've got to play it, you know, there was just no doubt about it. I just got to play it, and there was just something about it. I mean, I've played trumpet, trombone, other brass instruments as well. I've played all kinds of different instruments over the years, but there's just something about the saxophone, its design, its engraving, all the detail that goes into its, you know, its manufacture, and it really is a very, very well made instrument, I must admit, you know. So yeah, very interesting indeed. So we'll have a look more closely now at the problem, and take it from there. Okay, so to cover the basics, where the sound all starts on a saxophone is right here at this end here, the mouthpiece. Now, this is the area where the sound starts from. You might remember as a child when you got a piece of grass between your thumbs like that, and then blew through that when you're holding the blade of grass, how you could make a sound, a note, and the grass blade vibrated with the air rushing past, and that then produced a sound. Well, it's the same here. We've got the reed at the end here, which makes all the sounds. So the entire sound from the saxophone, anybody who knows, who's listened to a saxophone or played it, knows the saxophone is a very loud instrument. There's no volume control really on a saxophone, apart from how you blow into the saxophone controls its volume. But you know, it's a very loud instrument nevertheless, considering it just comes from that little reed there at the end. And in the world of saxophones and the different types of saxophones, obviously, the main types that I have are the soprano saxophone. This is what's called an alto saxophone, and then the next one up, which is a bigger saxophone, has a crook in the neck here, and it's a much bigger saxophone, and that's called the tenor saxophone. And then you get into all the bass saxophones, and there's all different family of instruments in the saxophone range as well. So they go on for to huge sizes as well. I've seen some absolutely ginormous sizes. You will find that if you research saxophones on YouTube. There's plenty of videos on there, people showing you the different models of saxophone and the sound that they make. But this is the alto saxophone, which is used widely across all different music styles, as well as the tenor saxophone in jazz, etc. So this, as I said earlier, can be used in many different music styles. Now, it all starts, as I say, with a mouthpiece, but here we've got a Yamaha mouthpiece with a ligature, which is this leather strap here. There are different types of ligatures. There are cage ligatures, strap ligatures. There are different types of ligature and mouthpiece, and you can go crazy with the mouthpiece and the reeds, etc. I mean, I have a selection of some reeds here, which again, you know, are different strengths, and they're all different types of reeds, and of course we've got these are Rico Royals. There's Jazz Select ones, and they all have different sounds as well. That's the thing about saxophones. You can get a really cheap saxophone, but a really good mouthpiece with a good reed, and you can make it sound like $1 million, you know. Or you can get cheap reeds, rubbishy mouthpieces, and the saxophone might not sound so good. So a lot of it's to do with the mouthpiece, really. There's a lot of theory out there, a bit like hi-fi buffs that are into oxygen-free copper for speaker cable, things like that, that are very much into, you know, convincing themselves, if you like, that they can make saxophones sound completely different by changing certain things on them. And there's a big market in the mouthpieces. There's brass mouthpieces. There's there are platinum mouthpieces, gold mouthpieces, you know, instead of ebonite and plastic and rubber. And there are different styles of mouthpiece with different resonances and depths and angles that they're cut at as well, so that the note that they make, or the sound, the way the air flows through the mouthpiece is designed in such a way where it gives a unique sound, or a harmonic rich sound. Again, the reeds are the same as well. There are people that file reeds down when they get them. They go for a ritual of softening them up and, you know, putting them in water, which you're meant to do, or wet them before you start playing anyway. That's why you must always have a damp reed or a wet reed before you start playing. But the jazz players or sax players put reeds in glasses of water for hours on end, soaking them or whatever. They treat them a certain way, they file the reed down, they have all sorts of different ways of doing it. And as well, there are synthetic reeds available now, so you can purchase those where they're like made of a synthetic material, a plasticky sort of material, and they have a unique sound as well. And again, there are so many different variables as well, and the ligatures that hold the actual mouthpiece reed onto the mouthpiece, and different styles of mouthpieces. So that's a whole different world that you can go into with saxophones. Very interesting. There's a lot of theory and design and things. I've even seen on some saxophones here where you put sheet music in on this little bracket here that sticks out. You put sheet music there when you're sort of like a marching band or a band player, etc. They put like a rod here with a music holder. I've even seen these little solid silver weights, because there's some theory into putting a solid weight here changes the note of a saxophone, its richness. So there's all kinds of market. There's a big market out there really in selling all these accessories and bits and bobs for saxophones. It's a very, very impressive market for that area alone, just the mouthpiece alone. And you know, if you go across to some of these music exhibitions and that are run across the world, there are leading manufacturers from all over the world that develop different styles of mouthpiece, different styles of ligature, reeds, and that some of them are extremely expensive. You know, you can spend thousands of pounds even on a very expensive mouthpiece, or you can spend next to nothing. You know. So this is a Yamaha mouthpiece that's on the end here, and the reed. And then of course, if we just remove it from the cork, the neck cork, which is this here, we have what's called cork grease that we apply on this, so that it allows us to easily slide the mouthpiece on and off. But again, the basic design of this mouthpiece is, as I say, the ligature suspends the reed and the mouthpiece, so that it obviously allows freedom of movement for the reed to vibrate, obviously. So this is still a bit wet from playing, but basically the mouthpiece itself, this one's a 4C, so this is quite a beginner mouthpiece. But again, you can get different depths cut in the mouthpiece and openings, etc., and the little gaps at the end there for the opening. And then of course you've got the different reeds as well that you place on the mouthpiece. And again, the ligatures themselves vary in manufacture. There are some that are like a wire cage that go around, and they have minimal contact areas, whereas this, you've got quite a large contact area on the reed. But some of the cage ones that go around, they just have a pinpoint just to hold the reed there, so it allows more vibration of the reed. And again, depending on what reed you've got, you know, you have to make sure that they're not bent or distorted, cracked, anything like that causes the reed not to work properly. So that's where the music comes from, if you like, or the note that you blow. The vibration of the mouthpiece reed then allows the sound to come down the neck. And then of course on the neck itself, you know, there are different styles, if you like, of neck on different saxophones. This is obviously an alto sax, but as I say, on the tenor sax it bends, it's got a crooked sort of neck on it. Now, a lot of people that begin into saxophones and whatever, they don't really know how to handle a saxophone, and it's so easy to damage a saxophone. A lot of people grab the saxophone by the neck if they don't know what they're doing, and it bends this this mechanism here, which is for the octave. So when we press the thumb button on the saxophone, in order to go to the different octaves, we end up pressing this key here on the back. This is where our thumb rest is, this black button, and then we finger this when we wish to play an octave. And obviously, as you can see, when I press this, you can see this mechanism here starts to move, and that in itself gets caught in this cage here, and it moves that, obviously, so we can play an octave. Now, if you obviously don't know how to pick a saxophone up, and you end up, you know, grabbing the saxophone by the mouthpiece or the neck to try and pick it up instead of by the bell, which is what you should always do, is pick the saxophone up by its bell and not by the neck. But some people do that, they grab this and then they hold it tight, and it bends this mechanism so it doesn't work. Or when you press that octave button in there, this little pad doesn't lift up high enough, it doesn't come off, so then you can't play the higher octaves. So that in itself can cause a problem. But as we get going down the instrument and we have a deeper look, we've got all these pads. Now, if I just take the neck off again just a moment so we can turn it onto its back. And this is where there's some similarities in a way to radio frequency or RF designs, in the fact that we've got all these little pads that cover the cavity. So the main cavity of the instrument is this tube which goes right the way down, obviously, and then as we go along, we've got the openings for the notes that are played on the saxophone. And so you notice as well the pads get larger as we go down the saxophone right to the bell. So the reason for that is because the higher notes are played higher up on the saxophone in this area, and when we get to the palm keys, which is what the real high notes are played on, then you can see these little pads here are just small in diameter in comparison to the rest of the pads further down the instrument, and that's so that the higher frequencies are let out through these holes. Now on radio frequency equipment, for diversify to that a little bit, cavity filters, things like antenna filters or duplexers or band pass filters, etc. The UHF, VHF microwave frequencies, as we know, have cavities, and they're tuned obviously by a slug that goes in, or a resonator that changes its shape depending on what frequency you're going to be on. It's the same here on the saxophone, that we've got essentially a tuned cavity that goes right the way up to the bell, and depending on what holes we close off, how long or short we make that cavity, then depends on the frequency or the resonance. And so that's where there's a similarity between radio frequency cavity or oscillator designs or filter designs and the saxophone, is that there's that common relationship between them, is that as we close off pads higher up here, then the lower notes then start to emanate from the instrument, because we've got obviously the larger pads, the larger holes as we're going down the instrument, and thus it becomes able to produce lower frequencies in note. Whereas if we play the upper part of the instrument, then obviously we're closing off just smaller holes or opening them up to allow the sound to come out at the higher frequencies. So that's why this instrument's quite unique in a way, because in order to judge all those holes and where they're going to be, bearing in mind when Adolf Sax did these back in the 1840s, there was no computer modelling back then, and there was nothing, there's obviously a lot of thought that had to go into it, and experimentation in order to get the right frequencies of the notes as well, and obviously control that as part of the design. So the buttons on the saxophone are quite wide reaching. There's buttons absolutely everywhere on the saxophone, as you can see. And now some of them might not be quite apparent actually, but let's have a look in greater detail here. So we've got a key here, believe it or not, and on some saxophones that might also be a pearl key, but on this one it isn't. It's just a like a jewel looking brass key, and then we've a key there, the B key, and then we've got the B flat, so we can obviously press both of them together if we want the B flat or B on its own, and that's the A key, the G key, and then we've obviously got here the G sharp, and then the variants of that here, which we've got in that pad. And so we've got, in just this little area alone, we've got 1, 2, 3, and then as we go further down the saxophone and we get almost to where the bell starts, then this is when we get the other keys, F, E, and then D. And then we've got other keys here as well, 2 there, look. Got another one here, that one. We've got this as a key as well, and then with 3 more here, and they're all shaped so that when you hold the instrument with your thumb in the thumb hook, and then obviously touching the keys, if fingering the keys, you can with your palm press these keys, you see, and they're shaped so that you don't slip off. So you can just literally with the instrument, you can be playing and then just literally just touch them like that. And there are different fingerings that you can do as well, so these different keys. So there's quite a lot of keys there. So what have we got in total then? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, including that one there. Then we've got obviously 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Then with the palm keys, 20, 21, 22. And then underneath, we've got the octave key. So it's 23 keys on this particular saxophone. So that's what we've got. So quite an interesting little thing. Now on this device as well, we've got, what the problem is on this instrument is, when these pads close, obviously there's not to be any leaks. So you know, when I decide I'm going to close that note there, the F for example, that it will close off that pad altogether. It will block that hole completely. Now if it doesn't block that hole and it leaks, in other words it comes off the hole a bit, because the mechanism that controls it needs adjustment, or it's got a problem. It basically means that hole doesn't get closed off properly, and it leaks air out of it, and then it causes a sax to make funny sounds or screeches, that kind of thing. And you'll see as well when I press some of the notes here, like for example the E key there, you've got a number of pads that close down. So you've this pad here that closes, and that pad there, these two close, so they're all interlinked, you see. So you can press that key down and that pad might be held well against the opening to close it off, but this pad here might be out of adjustment and it might be lifted a bit. And so all these rods and connecting rods and little control arms have little adjusters to adjust those different mechanisms. And as well as that, as you can see here on this key, there's a little screw that goes through, that little screw there, and that goes through. So when that particular key sequence is used, this pad might try to lift, you see, and thus this screw here on this link actually prevents that. So when we've keyed the E key, for example, then obviously that screw holds this pad down. So if we then try and finger another note, for example, then it won't allow that to lift when it's meant to be down. And so there's a little adjusting screw there, and that's actually the fault on this saxophone, is that that's gone out of adjustment, which I'm going to show you in a moment. So when you take a sax to a repairer, for example, they often stick down the neck here a strip LED light, and it goes right the way down into the bell and goes all the way around to this section here. And then what they do then, you see, is they press all the keys down, including the ones there, and they're looking in a dark room then for light escaping from these pads. Now if any light comes out, obviously then there's a fault on the saxophone. It needs to be addressed, otherwise it'll not make the right sound. And that's essentially what's occurred here, is that the saxophone doesn't make the right sound because we've got a problem here. Now I'll show you what the problem is. If I hold the B, A, G key down, okay, and then the G sharp, which is this key there, that one. If I hold the G sharp down, you can see this pad here starts to rise. Now if I then finger an F, the pad gets closed down, obviously, and that means that pad there is meant to close. Now if as I press the G sharp key, okay, so we're fingering B, A, G, and then the G sharp, we're holding the F down, so we're going for an F. If I just let my little finger on and off the G sharp, you can just see that pad's moving, and it shouldn't move, you see, it shouldn't move. and that's what's happening. So if I were to finger an F with the G sharp being down, because I'm going to then do a transition to a G sharp from an F, then basically this pad will make the instrument sound funny, because when I'm keying an F, there's a leak. The sound isn't getting down to this hole here. You see, these two holes, these would let the sound, the note F, come out. And obviously with that pad there higher up the instrument, not closing that hole off properly, it will then allow air to escape there, and obviously the note will change frequency, because the cavity, if you remember with the RF example, radio frequency example, which we use a lot on this channel with the tuning of radio telecommunications RF equipment, that, you know, if we have any leaks in a RF cavity because something's not sealed up properly or whatever, then it will change its resonant frequency. And so that's essentially what's going on here. So that pad, as you can see, is moving. So we'll need to adjust this screw here with all these keys down, and then figuring the G sharp so that movement doesn't happen. And that way then it'll seal that hole off and prevent it from making an awful squeaky sound, or a horrible squeal, or not the right note, etc. So that's the sort of maintenance that's done. But you'll also notice as well, on these pads as well, not only do they have to be in a closed position to make the correct note, but they also have to be in an open position on some of the pads as well to make the right note. And that's why we've got these little spaces here and these little cushions, and they're all over the instrument, little corks, little cork pads that allow the mechanism to settle back in the right position. If it doesn't settle back in the right position, then it will, I'm afraid, not make the right sound. It'll be a bit like a piano that's out of tune. You know, it's got to be, the distances and have all got to be correct on a saxophone, otherwise it won't make the correct sound. So join me in a moment and we'll get that adjusted. And that's of course another reason why, before we do the adjustment there, that we need, you don't pick the saxophone up by holding it like that, and then squeezing and grabbing it. You know, it's always by the bell. You know, always pick it up by the bell, because if you squeeze these rods bend quite easily, and then obviously once you've bent them, then it'll make the adjustments all out of kilter, and that's what will affect it. But as you can see, it's a very intricate design, you know, all these little adjusters and rods and adjustments. And of course it's not just a case like when we set that screw in the correct position to hold that pad down. If the screw's too far down, then it affects the other pads further down here, because then when you press this, it'll be harder to try and get that seal. So that's got to be a precise adjustment when we do it. And so there's all these different things. But again, as we, you know, start right from the top, we've got the very small tube, and as it goes down, the pads not only get bigger, but the tube gets wider and wider, and then the holes get bigger as well for the notes to come out. And that's one of the main things that also happens on saxophones, is that these pads deteriorate. And so what happens is, depending on how old the saxophone is, and obviously as people with sax players know very much, that the older the saxophone, the more troublesome these pads can be. And it all depends on what you eat and drink as well before you play, because obviously everything that comes out your mouth enters the saxophone, it comes down this tube, and it tends to settle in the bend part down here, in this area, in that bend section. So there's a little devices which I'll show later that help clean saxophones or keep the moisture content down, because it deteriorates, what they call pad savers. Because some of obviously the pads are closed all the time and moisture gets trapped inside, and it causes these little pads to, leather pads to deteriorate and crack and break, and they don't allow a good seal. So when they're closed, there's these gaps, or it doesn't you know, close off properly because of the damaged material. So there's all kinds of little foibles and things with saxophones. But yeah, generally the older the instrument, the more troublesome these pads can be. And of course it's very expensive to get these pads changed. There's a big process to go through with some of them. Obviously disassembling the saxophone, and I think on the older sax, I'm not sure on the new ones, but on the older ones they're held in with like shellac, and there's various techniques of unbonding them and then rebonding them back on the new pads and treating them and obviously gluing them back into place. There's all this techniques, because on older saxophones they use the shellac, melt it down to then create the glue, if you like, to glue the pad on. And so there's quite a lot to it as well, you know, and obviously brazing and various other things that needs to be done to do body repairs, etc., where there's physical damage and corrosion or anything like that that's caused through years of playing. So it's really quite intricate, and I'm just trying to see if I can find something on the body of the saxophone, and I think that's one there actually. I think there's a little pad thing just down there, that little cork thing on the body, but there are little corks and things, you know, that, like, there's one there just where my finger is there. That's a little cushion, a little pad for that rod, and these drop off. So obviously if they drop off, these little cushions, then in effect then you can end up with the instrument doing things it shouldn't be doing. And so a fully qualified saxophone repairer knows where to look and what to do, and you know, and you should take your saxophone for a service, you know, every now and then to make sure that it's in tip-top condition. But you know, that's basically what most people do. And there's various pads and things that need to be replaced, that get squashed down over years of playing, etc. So right, we'll get this thing adjusted and then see what it's like after that. I'll give it a play. Okay, so here we've got the offending article, and obviously if I were to hold that down, we've got that little gap. You can just see it there. So I just need to stick a screwdriver in there and hope for the best. So first of all, let's just get something to put in that, wedge that down with, and let's have a look here. Let's have a look, see what we can do. So right, hopefully we can make an adjustment. Let's have a look. Now what I'm hoping for, get that screwdriver in there like that, and then we can just adjust it. Now then, just have a look, see whether that's fixed it. It appears to have done. It's not lifting now. Maybe a slight adjustment, just a bit more. So just ever such a tiny bit of movement there still, so we can adjust that. Let's see whether we can get to that screw again. This is a bit of an awkward angle for me, especially with filming at the same time. So let me see whether that sorts it. Right, so that's with the G sharp pressed, and then that's with the F down. So as you can see now, there's no movement, which is good. So I think that's fixed. Definitely seems to have fixed it. So there we go. There we go. So that's that. But yeah, the other thing with the moisture damage and everything that can happen to these over time, you need the obviously the Ken Dodd tickling stick. And those who don't know what Ken Dodd is, you can always do some research onto the Ken Dodd. But basically, that's the tickling stick to absorb moisture. So obviously, when we finish playing the saxophone, any spittle or whatever that's gone in to the saxophone normally collects in the bottom of the bell here, and you can generally tick that out by doing that, and it'll all come out. And then what you're left with then is just a moisture within the saxophone, because obviously your breath's going through, the moisture in your breath's going to end up in the saxophone. So that's why we have this device, which basically goes all the way in and to the sax, and then it as you can see there, it absorbs all the moisture. Now there's some debate over whether you should leave them in the saxophone or whether you should take them out after you've put them in. But some sax players put the what they call the pad saver, which is what this is, and then withdraw it afterwards once it's soaked up all the moisture, and then withdraw it out the saxophone, so that then, you know, it's not inside. It allows air then to flow through, you know, when it's stored back in its carry case, etc. So yeah, that's a little rundown of the alto sax and the saxophone repair. There's a lot to it, obviously, as well. You know, it's not just a simple instrument, you know, as such, to repair. It's obviously very complicated. As time goes on, when you own such an instrument, you get to know certain things, especially from other repairers and what have you. I think there used to be a thing years ago where if the pads stick, because if you're playing an instrument like this and say you've had, I don't know, 2 litres of Coca-Cola or whatever before you start playing, the pads then sometimes can stick down. So even when you've unkeyed the note, the pad just stays there, it sticks, because the sticky substances from your breath, the sugars and stuff like that, get onto the pads over time. They get dirty, so it's always worth cleaning the pads. But again, there's, you know, no abrasive chemicals or getting rags in and things like that with harsh chemicals on. It's just generally good practice when you've finished playing to use the sax pad saver thing that I've just shown you, pushed in, and press these down just so that the pads get touched by it and it absorbs any moisture that's on them. I've heard some American players used to put dollar bills in. If the pads were sticky, they'd basically put a dollar bill in and then press the note down and then pull the note out from underneath the pad while it was closed, withdraw the note, and the whatever's on the note, I think it just had that effect of stopping the pad from sticking to the outside. But just one of those, what they call them, Q-tips things to clean around the outside edge of the cylindrical opening here and clean any residues or substances that are off. So, you know, it's always good to make sure before you play sax that your mouth's not full of, you know, wash your mouth out beforehand before playing, and that way then it minimises the chance of any food, what you've drunk or whatever that's been in your mouth before and entering the sax and causing problems later on. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that so far. a nice look at the alto saxophone and its problems and things. So by all means, you know, leave your comments in the description below. So we'll give it a play, nothing fancy, to see what it sounds like, and hopefully it'll play okay. Thank you for that. Alright then, so now we're ready to have a look at the keys of the saxophone finally, before we play the instrument anyway. Obviously there are lots of keys all over the saxophone, doesn't matter what saxophone you buy, whether it's a soprano, an alto, tenor sax, all the other sax, all full of keys everywhere. Depending on how old the sax is, depends on some keys where they are. Some very old saxophones have a missing key, simply because the way that were designed and the notal range that were meant to go to was a bit more suppressed than the modern saxophones. There are slight differences as well in other parts in models of these keys here. This generally is more common across all the saxophones, this one, but this key here might change its shape or move location slightly. There are a few little buttons and things on the saxophone that do change ever so slightly on different models. They might be in the same place but different shape. They might be pearlised, so you could effectively get a pearl one here, whereas on other saxophones like this you don't get it, or on others it might be slightly different shape or located slightly differently. So they're not all the same. So they are more or less 99.99% the same, but there are some very unique slight differences. So if we just start at the top of the instrument first, which is obviously where the higher notes are played in this particular scenario, on this section of the instrument, the top part being the smallest bit, the higher notes come out. Basically, we've got what's called the on the very top there, that jewel key here, that's called the front F key. That, so when we press that down, we get what's called the front F. Again, some of these keys are generally meant for what's called alternative keying or altissimo. So in other words, you get a better keying style, so that while you're playing in certain styles, you can key different notes or the same note differently, if you like. And there are different techniques and things which I'm not going to go too far into, but basically the altissimo range, that's what this key provides as one of those notes. But it's known in this context as the front F. Okay, this is the B key, so we want to play a B note. That's what we press here. That's a B key. This is known as a biz or a B flat key. So we can finger both of those together to get a B flat note, which is, as you know, in blues music or whatever, when we want sharps and flats, we can key those on this instrument so we can get a B flat. This is an A key, so if we want to play an A, then we key that down along with this, and then if we want to play a G, then we basically press this key here, so that's B, A, G. So unlike a piano, if we're going further into the key, when we press one key like the middle C on a piano or any key, you know, on the piano, it makes that sound. On a saxophone it's slightly different. In order to get an A out, for example, you'd have to hold both of those down to get an A, and all three down to get a G, or one down to get a B, or, you know, that's basically what you have to do all the way down the instrument, because you have to close off those holes, you see, as you're going down the instrument. So it's a different way of playing on a saxophone to what it is on a piano. So that's where there's slight differences, obviously. So yeah, so that's a B, B flat, that's an A, that's a G, that's G sharp, okay, or an A flat, because as we know on pianos, for example, when we go to the black notes on a piano, they can either be sharps or flats. If you're going from left to right on the piano, so you're going that way on the keyboard, and you're going from a white note to a black note and then to another note further to the right of the keyboard, as long as you're going right, then that will be known as a sharp. And if you're then coming down the musical scale from right to left of the keyboard, if you like, so you could go from a white note to a black back to a white, or a white note to a black to another black, it doesn't matter, they will be known as flats, even though you're hitting the same key. So that's why black notes on pianos can be both sharps and flats, depending on which direction you're approaching that note from. So again, this is a G sharp, so this will also can be an A flat. Okay, this is a low C sharp or a D flat. Okay, this one here is a low B flat or an A sharp, and this one, which seems to close off these big pads here, that's for the low B flat. Okay, and that's why this instrument's known as a B flat instrument, simply because when we've closed all the holes off on the entire instrument right the way down, and all the pads are down, basically one note comes out, which is obviously for the entire instrument, including the bell, which is a low B flat, so the lowest note it can go to in this particular context. Okay. Obviously we've got the palm keys here, which are used for keying the high notes, which is what we can use for playing very high screeching notes. So for example, the very top here, this one known is the top D sharp E flat palm key, so that plays D sharp or E flat. This one here is a top D palm key, D for delta. This one is the top F palm key, so that's where we get the very high F on the higher octave. So that's all the top of the instrument wireless covered. On the back at the top here is we've got the octave key, which is what we key when we wish to change from the lower octave to the higher octave. So that's when we can introduce that with the thumb rest there. Then as we go down the instrument, a bit further down, we've got here keys, these three, one there, these three, those two, and then obviously those are that in that center. So to explain, this is the F key, that's the E key, and that's the G key, D key, sorry. So it's F, E, D. So in other words, the main ones are B, A, G, F, E, D, bag fed, which is what you more or less learn at the very start of learning saxophone. B, A, G, F, E, D. So obviously we've got these special keys here. Now basically this one here is the side key for the top E and F. So if you remember earlier, we were talking about the palm keys, which can play D sharp or E flat or D or F. But now with this key here, we can introduce the top E or F note. This is a side C, and then this is the side B flat or A sharp, that one. This is the top F. When we press this key down, it opens the little pad at the top here, which is right at the top of the notal scale, if you like, on the instrument. And then this here, this particular key, depending on how it's set out on different instruments, you know, it can be different shapes, etc. So you know, you can get different things, but I'm just going to have to familiarise myself here because I forgot. This is a side F sharp, I think it is. Yep, side F sharp. That's what that is, that one there. Now these two here, these obviously again close off some of the other pads that are lower down here, as you can see. So they're going to be the lower notes in particular. Now I do have some information on these as well, about Altissimo Keyings as well, but that's the D sharp E flat key, and that's the low C. Now that's not the end of it by any stretch of the imagination, because as I've just mentioned there's Altissimo Keying, alternative keyings, and although you can go across like 3 octaves or whatever normally on the saxophone as it is just standard, you can actually get much higher octaves out of it, and you can do that by pressing keys in certain sequences, and they are what's called Altissimo Keying, or alternative, and you can basically get higher notes way off the normal scale that it's designed for to come out of it. And there's a lot of different ways of being able to do that, but obviously that's down as well a lot to the player and the embouchure and the way that you shape your mouth while you're playing, and the reed and mouthpiece, and lots of other factors about airflow and exploiting sort of the harmonics. And just like in radio frequencies and in the radio spectrum and building, you know, radio transmitters or oscillators and things, we can select harmonics. And like in crystal oscillators, we can select the third, fourth, fifth. We can multiply those harmonics up so that we then get a higher frequency fundamental. In the context of this instrument, it's very similar in so far as that it can you can tune the higher harmonics of the fundamental to come out by alternative keying. So you could, for example, go for a C keying, for example, and then introduce some other keys that then will exploit the harmonics of that note at the very high fourth, fifth octaves, and that will then be produced on the instrument. As well as that, C sharp is one of the easiest notes to play on this instrument, because C sharp, no matter which octave you're in those with that octave key, you don't press any keys down at all on the instrument to blow a C sharp. So basically you don't touch any of the keys, and when you blow into the instrument, then it'll produce obviously a C sharp. So that's obviously a good way of remembering that. And again, the tuning of the instrument is affected by how far the mouthpiece is pushed on. So if it's not on enough, for example, then in essence the cavity is longer, isn't it? You know, the tune cavity, which is a whole of the instrument tubing, is effectively longer, so then it will produce a higher, well, basically it would produce a different note to what you're wanting. So in order to tune the saxophone more effectively, you then push this back on the cork a lot further, and that's how you can then produce fine tuning on the instrument as well. And so, you know, if again use cork grease, because it's quite difficult to push this on. So you basically put cork grease on, which is like per lip seal, and then you basically push the mouthpiece right on till it's, you know, about that far off the end of the neck, and it changes the sound remarkably when you do that as well. So there's lots of little quirks, you know, lots of little things that you learn and deal with. So that's about it. We'll play the instrument now, see what it sounds like. Hopefully it'll have resolved that problem, and give a little bit of the blues scale on it and across the two octaves. Nothing major, nothing fancy, so let's see whether it works. So and then after that, then I think that's it. So thanks very much, and let's see how it plays.